And today we have Hannah Mesawani, and I would like to introduce her. I'm going to read her bio, so excuse me for that. She was born and raised in Tangier, Morocco. She came to the United States in 2006 to pursue her education. She has a dual BA from Muhlenberg College in Media and Communications and Film Studies, and a master's from ISU in Communications. Hannah is passionate about the ways we communicate our values. Hannah has served on several nonprofit boards, including Pennsylvania's largest LGBTQIA+ organization and the YWCA McLean County, where she works as the Director of Missions and Equity Consulting. Hannah is working towards her PhD in Education for Social Justice through the University of San Diego and is focusing her research on the construction of whiteness and the racial identification of Middle Eastern and North African communities. And here's a little blurb for her presentation. Are you ready? She's going to provide an overview of what she does at the YWCA and then tell about her approach, which is the reason that I really wanted her to speak about facilitating conversations and training on DEI subjects. So fascinating, love to hear her speak. Please listen carefully to her phenomenal, one-of-a-kind accent, because it will keep you engaged. Thank you, Hannah. Please take it away.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate everyone being here. It's lovely to see so many friendly faces. Shannon, I have to give you a shout out because you were my hero last week. So just, yes, indeed. By email, we were friends. It's cool. We're friends now. We're there. Yes, we are. So yeah, I talk about race all day long, which makes me so many people's least favorite person, but we try to keep it fun. We try to keep it light, but we mostly try to keep it real. So today I will be chit-chatting about YWCA and all the different things that we do. And then I will emphasize a wee bit of what I do in terms of communication and conversations rather about race, about different forms of oppression, about gender identity, about all of the above, because as we know, life's hard. It's so hard. I'm so tired. Y'all tired too. Let's just turn it into therapy. Maybe that's what we need. I am not licensed, but I know someone on this call is. But I will kick off with my inability to share screen, maybe, or my ability to. We will find out. How many years of a pandemic does it take? Oop, I do need permissions. Please and thank you, Michelle. How many degrees before I know how to work Zoom? 45.
You should be able to.
Sweet. Hey, yo, there we are. All right, Michelle, you also get a gold star for being the only person this month, I think, who has pronounced my name correctly. So kudos. Thank you.
Good.
I appreciate it. I talk a lot, which is why my degrees are in communication. I talk quickly because hypercaffeination is the only way I know how to live. So please feel free to raise a hand, just yell out. I don't mind questions in the middle of my spiels. I don't mind suggestions. As interactive as this is, the happier I am and the happier most folks typically are as well. So I'm here today to talk about YWCA, not YMCA, though we love them too, but we are the literal queens of doing all things social justice. Our mission is quite literally to eliminate racism and to empower women. So that is pretty much what we are about. And we do it on a number of different levels. So since the creation of YWCA, whether that is internationally or locally, our mission has always been really, really upfront, which is part of what drew me towards the organization. So a lot of us work in, of course, nonprofit spaces, in spaces where we aim to serve. And sometimes because of whether it's constraints around grants, whether it's fear of alienating maybe more quote unquote traditional donor bases, or maybe it's just our own anxieties about how can I perhaps as a non-Black person talk about how Black Lives Matter, maybe I'm too nervous to do it. We face a lot of stumbling blocks in terms of how we uplift our mission and how we make true equity the heartbeat of what we do, even though for a lot of us, and I would dare say most of us, it is what we do. So part of what drew me to YW is that we just it's the name on the tin, and it's the contents of the tin as well. It's like what we try to do. So in addition to eliminating racism and empowering women, we always try to promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all across a number of different spectrums. And that is not just the mission work that I do, but it is embedded in each of our programs, each of our departments, which I'll talk a little bit about today. I will not profess to be an expert on all things childcare. My children are dogs, who you will hear barking, but we do have some friends on the call who are with Stepping Stones who might be able to jump in and support if I get anything wrong, or if I go, Nastasha, Alicia, help. So we got friends in the call is what I'm saying. We do a whole lot with YWCA, and I am super duper proud to even be associated with the fine folks who do that. So we've got everything from Labyrinth House and Labyrinth Made Goods, which supports formerly incarcerated women. I could spend literal months, probably not quite years, talking about the prison industrial complex and how the criminal legal system has a lot of pitfalls and how they disproportionately target people of color and women. So Labyrinth and Labyrinth Made Good strives to uplift these women in ways that aren't condescending, that aren't the sort of, if I may say, trauma porn that oftentimes we see of like, okay, if we get one snapshot, we'll help one person and the problem is solved. No. With YWCA, we believe in taking a very individualized and compassionate approach, whilst also addressing systemic issues and promoting education on all sides of the conversation, right? So when we're doing classes about, through our Strive program, for example, about money management, we're not taking a deficit lens that's like, hey, you're poor, don't have a latte, right? It's not the approach that we take. As anyone on the call who's ever had avocado toast knows, that's not how generational wealth is built, right? So we try to have conversations that are humanizing, that are uplifting, and that also take the information that we are privileged enough to gain from the communities we serve and weave that into the narrative of how we discuss systemic imbalances and how we shift misconceptions and perceptions about folks who are formerly incarcerated or perhaps also survivors of sexual violence. Which brings me to our next fantastic department of Stepping Stones. We have two of our advocates here on the call today. We are the only sexual assault survivor 24-hour hotline that serves our area at the moment. I want to emphasize that Stepping Stones does everything from individual to group counseling to medical advocacy. So if after an incident, someone is in the hospital and they're not sure if they want to go through the rape kit test, we have folks who are trained to be there for them as allies and as advocates. We also have, looking at you friends on the call, legal advocates who will stand by survivors throughout the entirety of the legal process, should they choose to prosecute. We also have any number of sexual violence prevention education that we offer to folks of all ages. And I would like to make a special point to note that these services are not just for those who have been direct victims or targets of sexual violence, but also their significant others. So for anyone on the call, we know the stats. 1 in 3 women will be victims of or survivors of, sexual violence. It affects these women, yes. It affects us, it's affected me, but it also affects the folks who support those women. So whether it's partners, whether it's parents, whether it's loved ones, Stepping Stones offers support to them as well. We have a program called RSVP, the Retired Seniors Volunteer Program. We partner with AmeriCorps Seniors, and we help connect our elderly community to fantastic opportunities within both YWCA and then the broader community as well. So if you and your organization have any volunteer needs, we've got the friends who are down to help. So everything from reading kids' books, everything from, quilt making to painting to just spending time with folks, because as I said at the beginning, the pandemic has been mad hard, y'all. It is lonely, it is rough. And so for our senior citizens and our senior civilians, I should say, because we don't just serve citizens, it's an opportunity to connect and to give back, because we want to value folks at every stage of their lives. Speaking of stages of our lives, we also offer Young Wonders early learning and youth development, as well as childcare. So it is one of the most, if not the most affordable childcare program and after school program for kiddos that you can enroll your child in for the entirety of the year. We have summer camps, or if you just need help certain weeks at a time, we offer the only anti-bias curriculum that parents get to opt into. So we are not making kids learn anything. So I just always want to be clear about that. But parents can choose to have their children be part of anti-bias lessons that range from everything to how to appreciate and value children with different hair textures or those who may not have hair, to understanding that sometimes kids have two moms or two dads, right? And it's always very, very age specific, very invitational, and very inclusive. And children are always allowed to be like, I'd rather play with my Legos if that's what they'd rather do. But we try to imbue our mission in all that we do. And again, I'm talking too fast, so good thing it's recorded. Watch it back on half speed and I'll probably sound a bit more like a regular human. And I did try, Michelle. I only had 1 cup of coffee today for you, for love. Which brings me to the love of what I do of mission and equity consulting. So this is a variation of a previous role within YWCA that we've sort of shaken about a little bit, and I get to have a lot of creative freedom with, which I love. A big thing about what I do as somebody who's getting my doctorate in education for social justice, as somebody who is as an immigrant, a queer person, I've grown up in poverty. I'm still not rich, as y'all may have guessed. As a Muslim, I always want to make sure that education is accessible to everyone, that it is invitational, that it is developmental, because what we don't want to do is create a politicized culture or even a local community where we feel like we can't talk about things. And I actually came into this line of work right around 2016. Y'all can imagine why, because I felt that as one of the few very pale people of color that a lot of my friends knew, as one of the few immigrants or queer women or Muslims that a lot of my colleagues knew, I was getting asked questions that they were too afraid to ask in more public spaces, right? So what does it mean when you say defund the police, for example, or what does Islam say about this, that, or the other? And while I will not profess to be an expert, I am a self-professed nerd, and I love few things more than research. So if y'all have different questions or challenges you're facing in your respective workplaces or even social groups, or just questions in your head that you're like, why is it okay for some folks to say the word queer versus not? Please hit me up. I'll share my contact information at the end of this. But I came into this line of work as somebody with so many different minoritized identities because I felt that no matter where I landed, I was going to be asked these questions anyway. So I figured, let's make a career of it, which leads us to mission and equity consulting. As I mentioned earlier, these are all the different ways that we are on a mission. I invite you to visit our website to learn a little bit more about how you can get involved, whether that's through time, talent, or treasure. So we always, as everybody on the call, loves a good donation, but we more so love good conversations and community collaborations. Speaking of a way to get involved with the community, happening this Saturday, I believe, is May 14th. We're having our Second Chance Month event, which I'll push again at the end of the session, but I wanted to make sure that I put this out there. Fantastic community collaborators, including Prairie State Legal, including so many different fantastic groups. Please be there because there's just so many good things happening in our community as efforts to stop some of the systemic hardships that keep affecting us, even if they might not affect us directly. Which brings us to, what is mission and equity consulting? I'm seeing some chats, so I'm just going to make sure no one's telling me to stop talking. Okay, no one told me to shut up just yet, so we're going to keep going. So my approach to DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, is more than just trying to capitalize off of the momentum that was gained in 2020 as a result of the egregious murders of so many Black folks at the hands of the police and at the hands of a larger industrial complex that does not value Black life to the degree it values white lives, right? I firmly believe that allyship is a verb. And so for folks, no matter your racial ethnic identity, no matter your sexual orientation, we always are in positions of being able to learn more and to offer more support. We all have semi-good Wi-Fi, right? Like maybe not all of us have the best Wi-Fi. Talk to your provider, right? But there's always the opportunity to do the work and to find different entry points into conversations that might seem scary. I firmly believe that the majority of folks don't want to mess up. I know that there's not one training or one conversation that is going to hashtag end racism or sexism, or suddenly no one's going to be homophobic. It is not my goal to change people's values. It is not my goal to change people's political persuasions. It is my goal to offer safe yet challenging spaces to have conversations around how we assign values to different identities. On your right-hand side of your screen, you'll see just some of the kids' books that we have in our daycare that offer opportunities for kids to see themselves represented, right? So I believe that to be an ally or to engage in DEI work, it is something that is internal. It requires us challenging our own presumptions. It is really hard for humanity, for people in general, to not see things that are new and different as bad and scary, right? So we have quite literally evolved to prefer things that are like us, things that are known, that are familiar. And I'm not saying I'm trying to undo evolution, but I am saying that we're trying to have a conversation about how we can broaden what we understand to be valuable, to be quote unquote normal, to be typical, to be welcome, to be valued, to be loved. And in that, I include all of the different identities that have historically been disadvantaged. And so fantastic author of, oh my goodness, why am I blanking out on the name of the book? That's terrible and embarrassing. I'm glad this will live on the internet forever. Anyway, Ijeoma Oluo says, anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And oftentimes in the conversations that I have with folks, whether that's one-on-one or in group settings, the hardest work is not necessarily putting up the hashtag or changing your Instagram picture to be, you know, in support of Pride Month, which is coming up, right? It's trying to unpack your own hesitations. It's trying to unpack your own misconceptions and preconceptions and biases, because we all have them, right? We are all, unless you are a Black person on this call, we are all capable of racism. And if you have questions about that, I'm so happy to talk about that at length too. But I'll keep us moving along. So the tenets of the work that I strive to do and that we at YWCA strive to do is to always provide accessibility, right? And so I will particularly focus my piece today on the work that I do and my peers do in terms of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion education. We want to create affordable and free educational trainings, healing circles, and facilitated conversations on any number of identity groups and systemic issues of oppression. So if you check out our Facebook page, every 2 Tuesdays a month, and then every other Thursday, we offer interactive trainings. It can be on anything from imposter syndrome to intercultural communication and cultural competency. I'll be doing a training on what is going on with abortion and the dialogue against abortion right now, right? And I want these to be free or as close to free as possible. We do consulting gigs more long-term with local nonprofits and local businesses as well. So we can do everything from DEI assessments. But one thing I want to say here, although we are working in a capitalist system and I do want to keep my job and make a little bit of money with YWCA, I hope that financial concerns are never, ever, ever an obstacle to folks doing better towards achieving an anti-racist lens and towards being better community-oriented partners. So when I say free in italics, I do mean that. And I also, when I share my email, I sincerely mean that you can always email me 5 years from now at 3 a.m. Angi. If you're like, what does non-binary mean? Shoot me that email or that text or what have you, because I think that we have to make these conversations accessible, because when we don't talk about these things, we end up amplifying the level of value and the level of sort of like taboo and fear, and then therefore divisiveness. And so without these kind of conversations, which do take an element of self-tokenization on my part and those who do the work, but without them, we really don't get anywhere. Second tenet of what I do, I am mixed race, so I identify as a woman of color, but my mama is white. That is why I'm so pale. I believe in relatability, so in meeting people where they're at and nurturing personal investment in issues of equity, right? So I do a lot of work that is not quite therapeutic, because I am not a therapist. That is not a degree I've gotten yet. But how do we see ourselves as part of this conversation? So relating to accessibility, too often we'll think about DEI or diversity as just a code word for race, to quote Sarah Ahmed, who's a fantastic scholar. When we talk about issues of DEI, this involves all of us, right? We are all impacted by the systems that either oppress us or do not oppress us, right? Because we all live in shared spaces here. And so when I do this work, even if I'm talking to a straight, high income white man who is able-bodied and cisgender, I want to be able to connect with that individual and explain with them and learn from them and share with them why these issues matter and why discussing race and discussing gender isn't quote unquote political, because too often we see that only minoritized identities, right? So women's issues, race, the right for same-sex couples to marry, those are always coded as political and sort of put off to the side as something potentially scary and dangerous. Whereas really, you know, queer love is the same thing as straight love, except it's just being policed harder by, you know, various different systems. So I try to drop shoulders and make it a space where folks can share their concerns with me in a confidential and safe space. And I can help kind of mitigate some of those. And again, show that investment in why having diverse companies, having representation from women and people of color, and women of color especially, not only helps an organization's bottom line, but it also helps us be better humans to each other. I'm a huge believer in collaboration. So for folks who've not heard the term oppression Olympics, it's an unfortunate thing we see in some social justice spaces where it turns into, why are we talking about Black lives when Latino populations have also been persecuted? Or why are we talking about women when we don't talk about, that's not the goal here, because I believe an injustice against any one group is an injustice against us all, right? So trying to be intersectional in what we do, trying to create spaces where folks of lots of different identities and lots of different values and lots of different backgrounds get to share what they're going through, get to share in the struggle and the conversation around the struggle, so that we can get rid of that struggle, so that we can minimize the fear around that struggle and the harm caused by that struggle. So when I say that, what I want to be clear with is we live in a predominantly white community. America is, for the moment, predominantly white. Positions of leadership in both local, national, and statewide corporations and organizations are predominantly white. So what I always want to do is be collaborative when I talk about ways to invest DEI principles in a workspace, in a religious space, in any sort of community, because having privilege doesn't mean that you have to be ashamed. There's not going to be a conversation where I'm like, you there, you have privilege, how dare you? Like, it's not about feeling bad about who you are just because you haven't been historically persecuted, right? What it is, though, is about how you spend that privilege and the time you take to learn about your privilege. And then, as I said, spend that privilege to uplift those around you, right? So we believe that the work of DEI, the work of quote unquote diversity, isn't just for diverse populations. So if I gave this talk right now exclusively to people of color and immigrants and LGBTQ folks, they would look at me like, yeah, girl, duh. So what we need to do is have folks who may not have lived these experiences be aware that they are real and valid, even if they're not the same experiences that you might have had, right? And so talking about different issues of equity, whether it's my personal expertise, as I said, self-professed nerd, trying to get all the degrees. Why? Because I want someone to call me Dr. Maswani one day, but also because this is what I'm passionate about. When I talk about these issues of equity, I want us to remember that these are not singular silos. This is not the oppression Olympics where we're trying to find out who had the hardest life. It's about us finding connections between these different struggles and then using a lot of the same efforts and the same energies to try to mitigate some of that, right? To try to eliminate the barriers that different historically oppressed groups have faced. So we offer a number of trainings and workshops, and I know some of y'all have been to some of them, addressing institutional, so large role, governmental, legal, legislative problems and issues of racism, interpersonal. So whether it's the, hey, can I touch your hair? Don't touch anyone's hair. Just don't touch anyone's bodies without their consent. Just no touching. It's COVID and also it's wrong. That is the lesson that you will take away from here. Just don't touch people. And then individual experiences of race and racism. And when I say that, I mean from the sides of being those who may inadvertently or knowingly perpetrate acts of racism or words of racism or racial violence, to those who've been on the receiving end of it, right? So knowing that there's not just one capital R racism, that it appears in different ways and that we can sort of work together to understand how to minimize that, right? When I do trainings for folks on the call who've had the misfortune perhaps of sitting through them with me, it's always individualized. I love an anonymous survey. I love trying to find out what is the heart of the discontent? What is the heart of how this ism is showing up? And then how can we safely address it in a way that helps all voices be heard, except not at the expense of perpetrating more racism and more harm? So again, encouraging reflection and education, and then having folks of all racial backgrounds understand that, yes, even you, if you are a white person listening in on this, you have a racial identity, right? And that is no more or less political than somebody who may or may not have an Arab racial identity. So trying to do a lot of unlearning so that we can learn. We do a lot on gender justice, and you'll hear a wee bit more about that from my video that'll be on our YouTube and our Facebook on Thursday. Don't mind me while I peep a chat. I will answer that question. So I just received a question of, do I find with anonymous surveys that people participate more often to try to get their voice heard? Yes, absolutely. So for folks on this call, especially those who might be in leadership positions and who are considering, how can I be more inclusive? How can I be more equitable in my workplace or my book club or my prayer circles, what have you? I always recommend having an anonymous survey, whether you invite somebody who's a third party outsider like me. I got no skin in the game, I got no power, but I got eyes, perspectives, and I've read a lot of books. Having an anonymous survey allows folks to share without fear of retribution, because too often, even for the most well-intentioned leaders, specifically if those leaders are white folks, perhaps a white woman who might be super duper compassionate, right? Hearing that you have inadvertently participated in the oppression of a colleague, inadvertently said something that was a racist microaggression, that can very likely send you on a very hard emotional journey that you want to process, that you might want to be like, I didn't mean it, I wasn't racist. Like, how could you call me racist? Or alternatively, it might make you cry. It might make you feel bad. And your instinct might be to turn to the person that has said, hey, that thing you did was racist. And what that does is it can unfortunately put your emotional labor as a white person onto the person of color who is already carrying the racial battle fatigue and the emotional labor of having been the recipient of so many microaggressions. And that's in the ideal situation where a person of color has a fantastic white boss who wants to do better. The other scenario in which it's especially helpful to do anonymous surveys is when folks don't feel safe. So speaking from personal experience, having had a supervisor who was outwardly presenting as very much quote unquote woke, but deeply problematic in a lot of the one-on-one conversations we had, there wasn't a universe in which even I, kind of an extrovert, kind of brazen, so I've been told, I didn't feel like I could tell her, hey, you questioning my lived experience was mad offensive. So having the opportunity to say, these are the things that are happening in our organization without fear of them coming up and challenging you and re-traumatizing you is so helpful. The thing with anonymous surveys, though, that a lot of folks, and my spidey senses tell me that you might be feeling some of this tension is, what if folks say things that aren't true? Well, I have a lot of expertise in terms of picking apart different trends, whether it is qualitative or quantitative, in terms of the data that I receive from these surveys. So what I typically do will find the theme of, okay, women are feeling less supported here, or parents are feeling less supported here. And what I do is anonymize the language so that we can talk about the issues and separate issues of equity from any interpersonal beef that might be there. But absolutely, yes, having the anonymity helps, because all too often, because of systemic injustice, because of historical lack of access to positions of leadership, we still see that the majority, I think it's 90% of leadership in Fortune 500 companies, it might be more, at least 90% of leadership in Fortune 500 companies are white, and particularly white men. For the folks that they supervise, are more likely to be people of color who don't have the power in that corporation or in terms of that interpersonally being valued or racially being listened to, right? Or like identity wise being valued. So having that anonymity offers protection to them, offers a free space to exhale, offers the opportunity to heal and sort of be like, this happened and it's real, without them having to carry the burden of, oh, I didn't mean to call you racist, but could you please not do that one thing, because it's hard. And I do want to emphasize for anyone on the call who is an ally, who is a white person or a straight person who has tried to do right by different communities, who is a man, who is a self-professed feminist, we love it. But when someone of a minoritized identity comes to you and says, hey, that thing you did, that hurt me, try your absolute hardest not to put your emotional labor on them while you process the fact that you might have done harm. Again, this is the sort of conversation I love to have. So if you, in your workplace, in your personal life, what have you, someone has said, hey, you did the thing and it hurt my feelings and it actually was pretty like homophobic, you might want to apologize and put that burden on the queer person that you might have traumatized or triggered. Don't make your journey towards anti-racism someone else's work, unless it's literally their job. And that's why I'm here. So I welcome all those questions, all those conversations. So thank you for that question. It took me on many a tangent, but I hope that that's a little bit helpful. Do folks have questions at this point in our little chat, by the way? If you do, I welcome them. If you don't, I'm happy to carry on. Okay, got a little chit chat going. Thank you. You are very, very, very welcome. All right.
I was going to say it's something else, but no, we're here. So somebody calls me on my bad and I say, I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I'm really going to try not to do that. Please keep telling me. Like, what do you say?
Yeah, I think
because I really genuinely want to know. Like, I'm sorry feels petty or small, you know, like it doesn't encompass all of it, right?
Yeah. I think in the same way that I'm sorry will never feel like enough, every single training I do will literally never be enough. Do you know what I mean? And this is the nihilism speaking. Depression, it's real. But I think what you can do is, right, game recognized game. I think what you can do is say, thank you so much for telling me that. While that was not my intention, I know I have a lot to learn and a lot to do. And I think it's important that that any of us don't try to defend what we did. Just acknowledge that, thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry that I hurt you. Not, I'm so sorry if I hurt you. I'm so sorry that I caused the pain that the person is communicating to you. I had a lot of learning to do. If and when, to the person that came to you, if and when you want to talk about this or are able to talk about this, please let me know. Because the other thing that sometimes can be a burden, and I felt this with the previous supervisor I'm thinking of, is, can I call you now? I need to talk it through. That person who, right, your expression, Shannon, tells me that you would not be doing that, and that is the perfect response. You just have to say, thank you for telling me. I'm so sorry for the hurt that I caused. If you are up for talking about this, please let me know. But I know that I have a lot of learning to do and a lot of unlearning to do, and I really appreciate you doing this. I hope you know that you can always tell me if I mess up in the future. It's not your job to tell me, but I really appreciate you bringing it to my attention. It can just be that, because I think too often we don't affirm folks when they tell us we've messed up, because none of us like to look stupid. None of us like to look mean, right? With a very few rare exceptions that we don't need to go into the supervillains of the world, right? But very few of us want to be caught messing up or caught causing harm. So I think our instinct might be to overly like, what can I do to make it up for you? Thank them. Give them space to process the fact that, oh my God, that was real hard to tell Shannon. And Shannon, we already know you and I are about to be real friends, but it can always feel like, oh, I got to process my own stuff before I can help her process her stuff. So give people time and space, but as much so, give them grace and give them thanks. Thank you. So one of the things about when we talk about equity and justice is, we've all heard it before. We've had a Black president. We're colorblind, post-racial. We don't need to talk about race. Women can vote. We don't need to talk about gender justice. I can feel the energy on the call. We are so far from that being our truth, right? We are so far from that being our truth. And for anyone who may or may not disagree with me, I'm sharing my email. You know I love coffee. Let's talk. So with YWCA, we seek to address systemic oppression of women and non-binary individuals as well. We encourage advocacy and self-affirmation. Again, we are not the organization that's going to boohoo, try and soothe people, and then take a photo op with folks who are disenfranchised, because that doesn't help anyone but our own egos, right? So even with our childcare, making sure that it is accessible, making sure that it is offering anti-bias curriculum. We know that women are disproportionately more likely to be the caregivers at home. We try to create systems, not just trainings, not just conversations, not just cute wall art, although we got cute wall art. We try to create systems that support like actual tangible ways to help folks, whether that's the Strive curriculum, whether that's Labyrinth, whether that's conversations that we'll have on bodily autonomy and on consent when we talk about stepping stones. So we know that we are not living in a world that values women and gender non-conforming folks as much as it has valued men. The patriarchy is still very real. That doesn't mean you got to feel bad if you're a man. That just means maybe stand up the women and non-binary folks around you, right? And if you want to know how, give me a call. So we talk about gender justice a lot as well. As a queer person, and also just as somebody who thinks everybody should feel safe in terms of who they love, as long as we're talking about consent. Put that out there, yes. Consenting adults only, please, thank you. We know that folks are often afraid of saying the wrong thing, so we help build awareness and confidence around language around LGBTQ identity. So oftentimes, I'll use the word queer as an umbrella term to discuss LGBTQIA++ identity, because the language, much like language around any advocacy movement, around any identity group, it changes, right? One of the more impactful questions, yet surprising question I had during a training was a gentleman who was really quite worked up and didn't know if he should say Black or African American, because it's changed over the years, right? Oftentimes I'll see a lot of the same thing about, do I say homosexual or do I say gay? And like, what does bisexual mean? It is okay to have those questions. There are infinite resources online, but I'm also happy to have one-on-one conversations about why some terms are preferred in some groups and some terms are preferred in other groups. What I also do is combine a combination of like narrative experience. I'm going to self-tokenize because this is the work I do. I try to role model trust so that other folks can, hopefully reciprocate some of their vulnerabilities and we can get some good work going. But I also talk about not just the language around LGBTQ identity, but how it's being portrayed in the media, how we tend to hypersexualize transgender folks, how the bathroom bill against trans folks is heinous and egregious because transgender individuals, particularly Black trans women, are infinitely more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators of violent crime. If you want statistics, they are my middle name now. I got you for that. But for organizations who might be thinking, how can I just make my handbook more LGBTQ inclusive? Let's go, let's talk about that. Or if you yourself have somebody in your life who is queer and you're not sure how to be most supportive. Again, I'm not going to say I know everything, but I got a lot of resources that I'm super duper happy to share and offer a space in which you're allowed to ask the questions that you might be embarrassed to ask otherwise. In terms of bias in general, we do a lot of interactive workshops and hopefully try to make things less scary. A lot of this work begins with looking inward. So as I said, allyship is a verb and it's one that starts internally and then we sort of bring to the world around us. So I'm sure many of you have done things like an identity wheel. Many of you have had to think about which of your identities is most salient or important, which identities of your own, regardless of how you identify, bring you the most confidence, but then also bring you the most flack when you're out in society, right? So we're big believers in living in our mission and trying to address internal bias that then manifests into explicit bias. And we do so from a way that challenges myths, because too often we hear, and I'm not going to repeat the statistics because they're all lies and our brains tend to remember negative statistics more than positive statistics. And I ain't here to miseducate, we are here to educate. We do a lot to sort of understand how, like the myth of the welfare queen, that's wrong. I'm happy to provide you all the resources on the women who quote unquote inspired that myth and how it is actually white men who are more likely to be recipients of welfare. We could talk about that at length, right? So how do we do the sort of internal feelingsy work almost of tackling bias, and then how do we do it from a place of contextually sound, evidence-based, historically informed information. You can tell I really love nerding out. And then again, privilege. How do we make sure we know that it is not a dirty word? If you have privilege, think about it as a currency, but then also immunity. So I am a white looking lady. I know that I have mad privilege because I get to talk about race to each of you. And more likely than not, you're not going to walk away going, oh, that angry immigrant. Whereas if I presented as dark as my sister, for example, she would be considered like the quote unquote angry Black woman or angry brown woman, right? I know that my level of education is a privilege. And while I could be hooty tooty about it, which I am sometimes, but only amongst enemies, I use it as a privilege to access spaces like these, to have these conversations, right? I talk a lot about spending our privilege. And so how can we use the different privileges that we have to advocate for people who typically aren't advocated for? And then, did I lose my train of thought? No, I didn't. It's back. I also like folks to think about privilege as an immunity, right? So I am able-bodied. I, for the most part, can walk up and down stairs. I ain't gonna run. Don't try and make me. But thinking about privilege as an immunity, I don't notice when the sidewalks are janky. I don't notice when there's not an elevator as much as perhaps loved ones who are struggling with mobility issues. So for me, I'm deeply privileged in that way. And it is mad embarrassing on an individual level when my partner has to be like, you realize we can't go down that road because it's not safe for me. And I process my own internal embarrassment of, oh, you're right. I process it internally. And then I figure out the ways that I can spend my privilege to draw attention to that so that we can create quite literally a safer community for other folks. And then part of understanding privilege is to create operational definitions, as I call them, so that let's say you and I are talking about, we're talking about, I don't know, race. We're talking about ethnicity. I want to make sure that we're both talking about the same thing, right? If we're talking about quote unquote conservative values, that could mean anything to you and then a whole other world of things to me, right? And so using the privilege of being a word nerd to try and figure out that we're talking about the same thing, right? Because all too often it's miscommunication that means we end up all the way off the charts. And again, identity work is personal work. I put this in this slideshow 15,000 times because it is. This is deeply personal. As much as we can put a fantastic mission statement or land acknowledgement and a labor acknowledgement, all of which are super important, we have to make sure that we are sponges soaking up the messaging behind that, soaking up the values and the learning opportunities for that. And that is why, again, we do a number of trainings that are geared towards majority folks, yes, but also specific trainings for LGBTQ folks or for folks of color who just need a space to be like, y'all, I'm really tired, because it can be mad lonely doing DEI work, yes, but it's also lonely being one of the only people of color in your office space. It's lonely being the only immigrant, right? And I don't have to tell anybody of color, anybody queer on this call that, right? So if y'all just need a buddy to be like, whew, it's hard, I got you for that, because it's really hard. So knowing that we offer a range of conversations and workshops and even cups of coffee, if that's what it takes to just sort of help someone feel a little bit more welcome in their own skin. And if you are still listening to me out there on the old internet and are like, you know what, I ain't sick of her yet, how do you get involved? Well, we have a number of different trainings that we offer. But again, every training I do, I will not recreate something and just put it out there because, well, it worked last time. I want to make sure that it is collaborative, that I'm communicating with folks for their specific needs. There is no one and done like magic statement that will cure bigotry, right? So these are just some of the areas I invite you to look at, whether it's like hiring access, whether it's how to offer language access support, how do we talk about religion and not get prickly and scary. Please reach out and be like, this is a thing I'm seeing. What can I do about it? Let's find out together, right? And a thing that I'm big on is also any collaboration or any training that I do with folks, particularly series of trainings. If you bring me in as a consultant or bring YW in as a consultant on any of this, from violence prevention to socio-emotional well-being, our goal is, again, access. So leaving with resources, because YWCA as an organization and me as one single human being, I don't want to be the gatekeeper of anything. I don't want to hoard resources. So anything I got, you got for free too. So knowing that that is always part of the dealio. And again, knowing that I love feedback, genuinely love feedback, even when I get in my feels about it and wish I could do a better job. We always try to learn. So trying to role model that vulnerability too, right? And so for folks who are on the call who may be thinking about issues that I have not yet covered, please, pretty please reach out and be like, why didn't you talk about this? And I'll be like, oh, you know what? Let me talk about it. Part of the series that I do every other Thursday, check out this Thursday, our YouTube and Facebook, is talking about current events and other identities that may not get the same spotlight. So I welcome learning about these things so that I can in turn share information about it. So please take a little boop, boop, screenshot. I think I spelled my email right. I'm happy to share my phone number on a non-YouTube platform because haters gonna hate. And then before I end, just re-emphasizing that it is, again, it is belated because of weather and life in general, but our Second Chance Month event happening on the 14th from 1 to 4. Hopefully the sun keeps on shining for us and we get to have a fantastic event with a lot of community partners. There'll be free food, there'll be a DJ, I'll be there. So hope to see y'all there. And thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. That was just phenomenal. I can't, how do I even follow that? That is just amazing. I'm always just in awe of everything I learned from you, and just the way that you approach DEI, and just how we all have a part of it. And so, you know, it makes me more aware of what I need to be doing, and more aware of other people. And I think that's always a good thing. And I love safe spaces. I'm all about that too. So